to the Power Relay with Micah Clay. A series of conversations with the technicians, leaders, engineers, and innovators critical to ensuring power reliability, safety, education, and innovation. We discuss the many facets of the power industry with the unsung heroes who power the world in the 21st century. Sponsored by Southern Staffing Group. We support your power industry talent acquisition efforts. If it involves power, we have you covered. Plug in and join our host, Micah Clay, veteran, entrepreneur, and power enthusiast, as we delve into the world of power.
Just a smell from I am looking.
As you can see, the intro to that video was very impactful in showing the probability of what can happen if electrical safety is not at the forefront of the conversation. Hence the reason I wanted to start this podcast interview off with this, to show the gravity with which we must operate in the field for these particular situations, and safety should always be paramount. And just wanted to show that clip to everyone to kind of see what life looks like. We'll be diving into a fantastic conversation with Jason and walking through the events of that day, his thought processes leading up to that point, and ultimately how it played out, the lessons learned, and everything else that came from that incident to help Jason get to where he is today. But I wanted to make this little quick introduction because I don't want to take away from the gravity of that video, but in my normal upbeat way, we start the interview off and it wasn't quite lining up. So I thought I'd insert this little clip to kind of give my thoughts and opinions on that situation. And it makes it realistic and readily apparent that safety has to be paramount within the things that we do, because everything that you work on can potentially kill you in the power industry. But without further ado, I hope you enjoy this interview with Jason Brozen. Thank you. Welcome back to the Power Relay with Micah Clay, where we discuss all things power, from startups and funding to boots on the ground electrical work to the strategic shifts shaping our grid and workforce. I'm your host, Micah Clay, and today's episode is one you won't forget. My guest is Jason Brozen, an arc flash survivor, a master electrician of nearly 30 years, and the current lead corporate safety and technical trainer for Tyndale. He's an NFPA certified electrical safety compliance professional, a seasoned instructor, and a man who's taken 7 months to come back from 2 weeks in the ICU after an incident that should have ended it all. Jason isn't here to sugarcoat anything. For anyone who has watched him tell his story, it's about as real as it gets. He's here to tell the truth about what happens when complacency creeps into your process, what went wrong, what could have been done differently, and why he's dedicated his life to making sure fewer techs wind up in the same situation or worse. This isn't theory. This is lived experience. And if you work near anything with current, you need to hear this. Jason, your story is fascinating, but before we get into the questions, can you give our audience a little bit more background on yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I appreciate you having me on. It's always an honor to get on to anybody and everybody's show because number one, I'm extremely passionate about keeping everyone safe out there that works in our electrical industry, whether you're working on a line crew or you're inside guy working on a breaker panel or you're a residential electrician or even down to building controls or HVAC, right? It's all electrical and it's all dangerous. So I've made it my mission, vision, passion. I talk a lot about that in my keynote type deals that I go around and do. Not everybody has mission, vision, passion. You know, they don't love what they do. And I'm just blessed enough that I love what I do. I feel like I'm decent at it. The world needs it and I get paid for it. So it's a win-win-win. But like you said, I've been a master electrician for about 30 years. I'm not licensed anymore because I don't need to be because I do this stuff. But I still carry my old school block and associate, master's card. And I spent, in time in every aspect, right? I started in audio video and then went to residential and then commercial, industrial, and then spent a long time in service working on, anywhere from 0 to 4160 volts, from $0 to $2 billion, project management, estimating. I even spent a couple of years in the VDC BIM, the CAD pre-construction world, working on our Kansas City airport out here. So that's a little bit of my technical background there.
That is awesome, and thanks for sharing with us for sure. And let's go ahead and get it started with the life-changing event. And this is kind of what a lot of our conversation centers around, and that's the arc flash event. What happened to that day? Walk us through it like we were on the job with you, if you could.
So, it's like I said, I spent about 20 years with a company that did largely service electrical work. So I might be working on, somebody's outlet's not working in a house. More typically, I'd be working in a commercial business, installing a circuit. Or in this case, this morning, this hotel got some new pool equipment, swimming pool. And with that came a pretty large control cabinet that needed a 200 amp circuit, 12208. And so you'll show throughout this presentation some of the B-roll stuff, of course, that I'm going to send you, and you'll see some pictures of it. But a couple of things I want to highlight right off the bat is, number one, this was 12208. Low voltage does not mean low danger. 12208 can and will arc flash large enough to hurt or kill you, right? And in my case, it was a 12208. So I needed to install a breaker and some equipment. And again, you'll see those pictures. And so this is a task that all of us electricians have done a million times. We install breakers and equipment throughout our career. From 12208, guys are doing it at 277, 480. You might be bolting breakers in. You might be using, square D ratchet type breakers that go in. Any of that stuff's pretty normal fare. But the reality is you're not supposed to do that energized.
Right.
And that's very clear. And this right here, unless it's going to kill somebody if you turn that panel off, and generally it's not. So this was a typical task that I received that morning to go out and install this breaker. They sent me because I was a lead guy and this was more of a risky task. So another thing I want to highlight that's huge on the radar is this was a stupid decision. This was not an ignorant decision. I knew the risk. They sent me because it was more risky, right? Again, most of the guys that do this and gals that do this, we know the risk, right? But we just continue on with these stupid decisions that end up injuring or killing us. So my task was to get that breaker installed. I go out there. It's a space. There's no breaker in that spot. Oftentimes when that equipment comes from the factory, almost always, if it's a space, they wrap that heavy black tape around that bus bar. And so the first task I needed to do was cut that tape off that bus bar because you can't bolt that breaker onto tape. And so what did I do? I grabbed my metal utility knife and I leaned in nice and close to that energized bus bar with 0 PPE, no earplugs, no eye protection, no hand protection, wearing fuel, polyester nylon. Started cutting the tape off that bus bar. And halfway through that process, I stopped because it was pretty sketchy. And you'll see when you run those pictures later that you have the 3 bus bars, A, B, and C phase. They're all energized. B phase was really close to A when I started. So it was really, really sketchy anyway. And again, this isn't uncommon for, sketchy stuff we do out in the field as electricians or whoever. And so I called my boss, said, this is extra sketchy, right? These bus bars are close. We probably ought to shut it off. And after a conversation with my boss, he said, just be careful. And he didn't say that. I'll get to why he said that coming up probably in a future question that you're going to ask. So don't judge yet. But after that, just be careful. That was enough encouragement for me to go back to do what I was doing. And oftentimes when I get interviewed or do my speech thing, I talk about everyone having a row of dominoes. And so every time you make a stupid choice, remember this was stupid. This wasn't ignorant. I 100% knew the risk. We all know the risk, right? You flip a domino and then until you get to the end of your string and that's your incident, your injury, fatality, etc. So him telling me to be careful was enough encouragement for me to go back to doing what I was doing. I actually got through that process of cutting the tape off that, blowing myself up. That would have been my second to the last domino, right? But then, since those bus bars were so close, the breaker wouldn't go in. Those breaker sides, they fit in between those arms closely, right? And I know because I bolted those kits in so many times in my career that they're all nut and bolted in, and you can get some play in those things if you need it, right? It may not be real easy if they're torqued correctly. So I was trying to think of what I could put in there, and so I thought to myself, hey, I got one of those wooden carpenter's pencils. I'll shove that in between those bars, and I'll tweak that down a little bit and get the play I need. And then I thought to myself, you know what? That's got graphite in that thing. That made arc through that pencil. So again, I wasn't stupid, right? I mean, it was stupid. This wasn't ignorance. I knew the risk, probably better than anybody in the company. And so couldn't do the pencil. You can't just stick a screwdriver in there, right? So what did I do? You'll see on the B-roll later. I took my ideal fuse pullers, which are made to go into that restricted approach boundary and pull energized fuses. They're fiberglass. They got a narrow end and a big end. I was going to stick the little narrow end in there and just give it a twist. Not even for 1 second that I realized there was a metal rivet in the end of that tool holding that thing together. Who would have ever thought that, right? I just reached back and grabbed that thing, shoved it in there, and right, and all that stuff comes out instantly. So this was a normal task on a normal day from a normal electrician, and I did it and blew myself up. And 95% of the time, the technician out there is going to blow themselves up. It doesn't just happen 95% of the time, right? You slip, you undo a wire, it springs over, you're drilling a hole in the top of a panel and you don't have your stupid cardboard in the right place, which you're not supposed to do, or you shove a fish tape, you know what I mean? They're usually person caused. So that's kind of how that accident happened.
And to your point, you mentioned dominoes. We had something very similar in military service when we're doing a root cause analysis on things, and it was the error chain, right? So it's a series of events that you kind of work yourself through. And ultimately, and obviously we can armchair quarterback it and pick it apart, right? But during the time, if you put yourself in that particular instance, many of us would have made the same decision, So,
oh yeah, I think one of your questions later is about complacency, and I'll get deeper in that. But some people use that Swiss cheese model too, like like your method, that method. And there's a lot of safety people out there that might be listening that hate the word complacency because the root cause problem solving geeks, like my wife. right? And I am too. I want to know why it happened. But the reality is, I also say this in every time I talk to people is you are the last line of defense. I don't care if every decision was wrong up to that point. Bottom line is most of the time you know the risk, and the reason you make these stupid choices is because of complacency, and we'll talk about that coming up. But
and we are so and we did mention complacency as kind of the root cause. I think we didn't necessarily come out right and say it, but and you've already kind of talked to your mindset. But what was your mindset, the system around you, or was it a mix of both? Do you think, to your point, you spoke with your manager or your boss and it said just be safe, right? So would you consider it a you problem or a systems problem?
So it depends on if you like to point your finger at someone else or yourself, right?
Right.
The reality is, just like I said, this is a final decision made by a guy in the field at that moment, right? I did not bring a lawsuit against my boss. I certainly probably could have because of the lack of training, the lack of PPE and policies and procedures regarding energized work, right? But 15 years ago, they said you couldn't survive a 40 cal arc in the first place, right?
Yep.
So a lot of people, even today, aren't following proper policies and procedures. I think we're going to get into that later too. But the mindset of me, and I can tell you, just speaking as a man, is, and I think probably speaking for you as a mission-oriented person, you go out to a job, you want to get it done,
Absolutely.
right? You're mission-oriented, and I can tell you, you may be thinking about your family up here in front of you on the way to work, but when you get in front of that panel and you got to install that breaker, everything else melts away, and I'm the guy that gets stuff done, and you're going to do it. And that complacency aspect of it, which we'll talk about, adds those flavors in, like, I've done this a million times.
Yep.
We've always done it this way. I don't need PPE. I'm just kind of whatever. It's only going to take me a second. All those things in here where you've built that normalization of deviation, right? So a person in the field for over 10 years, I'm going to say, unless you're special, you don't have the mindset that is automatically going to see that complacency. You've got to stop and think and do that risk assessment. That's a big deal.
Absolutely. And I think a couple of things to your point, because this has happened so long ago, and it seems like there's been a very strong push for 70E stuff here in the last couple of years. It doesn't seem like that was as prevalent as it is now. Is that a true statement?
Sure.
I'm just the recruiter, so I don't have the chronology necessarily.
Yeah, we barely got into it back in the day. And I can tell you what's funny is I probably knew that 70E better than anyone in the shop, which was barely, right? And so back then I was watching videos from my boss, Scott Margolin, now, when he was with West Tex and DuPont doing arc flash videos, and I was doing an eye on those, I didn't know even remotely what I know now about all the stupid things that I did and shouldn't have done. So
no, and I think that's just a human element of it, the complacency. You look at it and you can apply it to any industry. I'm an aviator as well and fly planes, and you'll see some of the most seasoned pilots die because of something as stupid as not unlocking a tail wheel or not pulling one removable flight cover or something along those lines, because you've done it over and over and over again. And we just have this sense of confidence that kind of comes with that. And then, you open yourself up to some of that lack of situational awareness, and maybe you don't put the operational risk management at the front of top of mind like it should be. So it can happen to any of us. And I think that's why, bringing this up and having you on is very, very important, because you're seasoned. You've been doing this for a very, very long time. And of course, what we deal with in this space is it can be life ending any day of the week, right? It's not an isolated incident. What people that, electricians and testers and everyone else work on is deadly every day that you're out there. And so, it's just always trying to keep that operational risk management mindset at the top of mind. And it seems like the industry is doing a little bit more around that. Obviously, like we said, a lot of it's driven to the CTDs now and driving the prize on that. So I think that's definitely a more safety focused approach than probably existed a decade ago, which is good. That means we're evolving where we need to be. But no, it can happen to the best of us. And to your point of being mission driven, that was always the case. And then I think there's another aspect of it. You weren't alone and unafraid on that job. I'm assuming you probably had a helper or somebody out there No, it was just you?
Working alone, working energized, no PPE.
Gotcha. So no safeties, nobody to pull the
None.
rope, no nothing. Okay.
Nothing. Yeah, one thing you said too that I always bring up in training when I do 7E training is that pilots, surgeons, they all have checklists, and there's a reason for that, right? Because of that complacency, you got to go through checklists, and there's a checklist in the 7E.
Yep.
Right. You have checklists when you're doing things that people can die, right? You or someone else. It's no different whether you're a pilot, whether you're a surgeon, or you're working on electrical. This thing right here literally has checklists in it so that you don't die, right, or kill someone else. So there's lots of tools out there that we know that we're starting to use a lot more. Like you said, too, we're better. There's the 70E, but also this became the standard for electrical equipment maintenance in January of 23. And, so there's things that NFPA documents between the code book to install it properly, and then the 70B to maintain it properly, and then the 70E to work around it safely and properly, right? That three-legged stool is what will keep you safe.
No, absolutely. And I think to that point, do you think it would have had a varying impact had you had that safety person on site that could have been there to say something, basically, right? So you get a second set of eyeballs that can kind of give you the reinforcement of, or, hey, this is kind of stupid, Jason, let's not do that. You know what I mean? Type of situation. That may
the best thing to do for companies, and oftentimes I get a question, well, what's the one thing that we could do to have a safer company or a safer culture? And I was like, it's training, man. It's awareness training, right? You're not going to send somebody into battle without going to boot camp, right? And learning how to shoot and move and everything else and conceal, right? It's the same thing. If you're not awareness training your people on the hazards, and I can tell you, Beer Meters, they're a company that does a lot of the electrical testing. So Brent just recreated the energy wheel. Right, it's an awesome tool.
Very cool.
But that energy wheel, it's not just electrical, right? If you're out on a job site, right? You have crush hazards, you can fall off ladders, there's a whole bunch of stuff, right? And if you don't know what those are, how do you work safe around them, right? So it's
a lot of it is ignorance, right? And we're definitely seeing that as an issue in the electrical industry. There's so much work out there, so we're bringing in less qualified individuals because the sites have to be manned. And then we're not addressing that training gap to get everybody up to speed. So I wouldn't be surprised if we probably see a few more accidents. And speaking of that, are you trending, or do you keep tabs on arc flash incidents or anything like that? And have you seen a change in trends lately?
It's pretty consistent. I mean, you still have, I could tell you, I hear about arc flashes more than the public would.
Right.
Right. Because somebody will say, hey, we had a guy up in New York, did you hear about, whoever? And, just a few weeks ago, there's an arc flash. And a lot of these never even make the news, right? Because they're over, they're just super fast. That, it's a millisecond, and then the ambulance comes, takes you away.
Yep.
The news don't even hear about it till long after. Generally, out here in Kansas City, we had a fatality last week with a line crew out here. The week before that, I had to cancel a trip because they had a fatality in Louisiana. I was going to go speak to their group. So you hear the arc flash and shock incidents, in my world, but you may not hear them so much, in the regular world. But I don't see them decreasing a whole lot. That's why OSHA came out with that new guidance, on arc flash and shock. And that was a long process with my boss with Partnership for Electrical Safety and a bunch of other people. But that's why they came out with that, is because we just keep seeing electricians getting damaged by, heat and shock. So.
No, it makes sense. And like I said, I think that it may have something to do from the macroeconomic play of we're injecting more junior talent in. And we lose a lot of the senior guys, and we're not necessarily getting the backfill of SMEs in the industry that'll kind of keep the momentum moving forward, if you will.
Yep, a lot of them raging out.
Yeah, exactly, and we see it. So hopefully we're making an impact. At least we have some evergreen content, and again, kind of plugging what you're doing with Tyndale as well. If you haven't gotten a chance to listen to Jason's standalone talks on this with the videos and everything, truly phenomenal stuff and very, very impactful. So awesome, my friend. And so kind of back to the questions a little bit. So after nearly basically dying on the job, what was the first hard truth that you had to confront in your recovery, be it physically or professionally?
Well, that's great. I mean, that's an interesting question. So, I mean, there's a lot of things after you get injured that go through your mind, and everyone's different, right? So, first, generally, I'll say that, some people don't handle injury well, and chemically, mentally, emotionally, physically, biologically, whatever, they'll pick up PTSD.
Yep.
You'll start with ASD, acute stress disorder, for about a month. I definitely had that, right? So I'm sitting at home, watching TV. It's a cruise ship it's a 70s movie about a cruise ship that these terrorists planting bombs on. Guys trying to disarm the bomb. It blows up. When it does, I go, and I can feel the anxiety coming over. So, there was a lot of thoughts before I got home, those two weeks before I got out of ICU and the burn unit. And I'll talk about those in a second. But when I got home, it's recovery, right? You can't use your hands. You got everybody's going to suffer from some level of acute stress disorder. That usually lasts a month. That PTSD can last a day. It can last a lifetime. I did not suffer from any PTSD whatsoever. So generally speaking, I've got friends that have PTSD, whether they were military or they were vocationally injured or police force, firefighters, whatever. I've got friends on all those different areas, and I know I didn't get PTSD because 2 years later, I got a service call to that exact same panel room and in front of that exact same equipment because it was buzzing because there was a CT wire loose, and I took the call, and I'm standing right in front of it, hair on the back of my neck standing up a little bit, but someone with PTSD wouldn't be able to drive past that hotel with that anxiety attack. So that happens to a lot of people, right? So back to me though, laying in the hospital bed, I wake up. You'll see some of this on the pictures probably that you're going to B-roll. But I went to sleep. Well, let me back up even further. Right after it happened, I knew it was bad. I stumbled out of the room, right? The manager, I got to say a light or the door cracked open because it was full of smoke. The lights were out. And the first thing I said was, am I on fire? Because I was doing this. I didn't know if I was on fire. It all happened in slow-mo. The arc flash, I could feel the pulses. But I get out of the room and, I knew it had happened, right? I already knew what an arc flash was. But I couldn't really, it's just a really, really surreal experience. Anybody in an accident will know what I'm talking about. It feels in slow-mo and there's not a lot of pain because you're totally in shock and adrenaline. And I'm not the kind of person that freaks out. I don't panic at anything. I didn't get that in my DNA. Even when something like this happened, you'll see on the video, if you play some of that, I'm not freaking out. I don't panic. I wanted to see how bad it was. So I went over to the bathroom and I looked at myself and I thought, yeah, that's pretty bad. But I thought it was a month bad, right? I didn't know that it was 7 months bad before I could even get to work, or 2 years bad before I was, functioning properly and all that. So the first, and I'm joking at the hospital with the doctors, they cut my pants off all the way up here. I'm Daisy Dukes. And, I'm joking around with them and they're having to cut my ring off because my fingers are all swole up and all that stuff. But, probably the first realization, the oh crap moment, was after I woke up out of a coma when they were pulling the staples out of my fingers. And I saw my hands and I could just twitch them about that much. And then you're like, oh my God, I got a mortgage payment in like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like I can't afford, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I got a stay-at-home wife and 2 little kids in private school, and I can't be off one day or I'm broke.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you panic. I don't care how strong-minded you think you are, how tough you think you are. You're not, right? And you have no control over, generally, you don't have a whole lot of control over chemicals in your brain, right? I'm not super emotional when it comes to that or panicky, but you're going to go, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then there's nothing I can't fix, with the exception of a loose steering column in a 77 Buick LeSabre, which I screwed up when I was 25 and I couldn't repair, right? It's the only thing I've not been able to fix, or, other than walked away from something. You can't fix this, right?
Absolutely.
It's hard work and it's tough. And then, I'm in the hospital. I can't get out and our furnace stops working, right? And my wife's at home with the kids, and she's freezing. Like, what do I do? And I'm like, I would have fixed that, right? That's something I'd go down.
Right.
And it was a stupid, $11 electric igniter to kick the gas on. It has one screw and it takes you 5 minutes to replace. Right. And that was a $250 hit.
Yep.
And I'm already broke in the hospital. So immediately you just going, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Absolutely.
So that's probably the first real part of it. The rest of it, you're pretty much in denial, or I was. Some people panic, but my real emotion to it didn't come in until when I'm sitting in the hospital a week later after I woke up out of that coma and found out, man, I'm screwed. It's going to be months of hard work. Right. So that's probably the biggest one.
No, and you kind of touched on the, the financial cost, but as with everything that goes wrong, there's usually a financial cost both to you and to the business. Can you kind of give us an overview of how that impacted you personally and the company and the client for that matter?
Yeah. Thankfully, work comp covered my accident, but I'll add to that. Work comp only covered half of what I made as an electrician because we're a higher paid, group of individuals, whether you're an electrician, anybody in that trade, whether you're HVAC or trades, HVAC, electrician, lineman, et cetera. So work comp, I lived on the Missouri side because Kansas City really is just a big, one thing. But, and I don't know too many people could take 7 months off work at half pay. I'll just add that. That means your truck goes back to the bank, your house go back to the mortgage company, you're moving back in with family. So even my burn, and I'm almost embarrassed to say it was only 14% burn, can still put you in the gutter, right?
Absolutely.
Take you out of everything you know and love. But financially, that's the non-human cost that people don't talk a lot about because either they don't want to because, human life's involved. Human life is always more important than the money side of things. But I can tell you, coming from the electrical construction side of things, if you don't make money, you're not writing paychecks, you're out of business, right? And that's important to stay in business and keep all the other families employed that rely on you as a business. So, in my specific accident, and we're only talking a 14% accident here, I already mentioned the work comp stuff. Oh, let me add, I had some supplementary insurance, right? Like I had Aflac at the time. Whatever brand you use, I highly recommended it because it allowed me to take off for up to a year without any bills or lifestyle changes, and I was covered, right? And work comp covered all the hospital and everything. So financially, I was not affected like I would be had I not had supplementary insurance. Had I not, it would have been a real struggle just to keep paying all the normal bills, right? Work comp pays all your other stuff, hospital and all that stuff. But in my case, the hospital bill was $220,000. Had about $65,000 in OSHA violations and citations. The original installer was involved because the equipment wasn't installed properly from the get-go. We involved GE to come out and re-UL list that equipment because we couldn't really get it out of the room. And now, sidebar, now if you blow up equipment, I don't know now so much as during COVID, it might be a year or two wait before you get your gear, right?
Absolutely.
So huge cost there, not in our case. But we had to pay GE $15,000 to come out and repair that equipment and re-UL list it because it was all a mess. And then you've got attorney's fees involved in there, right? You've got our attorney, our company, the hotel attorney, that individual's attorney. Then you got attorney pools like work comp, OSHA, GE. And they were all positioning like it might be a death investigation. Because when my wife went to the hospital, she asked the same question that all of your loved ones are going to ask. Is he or she going to be okay? And the doctors literally said, we don't know, right? I'm not trying to be dramatic, but they're like, hey, we don't know. It's going to be a couple of days because we don't have lung damage and all that stuff. So you get the attorney's fees in there, of course, increased insurance and all that stuff. There's a list, not to mention the downtime, which can be very expensive. This was a hotel, which is going to be shut down for a couple of days. So whatever that revenue is. But if you're stamping out widgets and you're shipping them out daily, there's a huge cost. And if you're a power plant, something happens like that, contractually it might be $100,000 a day that you're not cost, fine for not producing electricity. So my accident 15 years ago was $1.2 million.
Wow.
Today's money, that would be $2 million. So that's a big cost right, affiliated with these accidents. And then I always highlight the small decisions. These all your companies generally, construction, their bonuses, profit sharing raises all comes off the cream of the company. And if you have a $2, $3, $4, $5 million hit, nobody gets raises, bonuses, profit sharing. And so small decisions that we think are not big decisions. But you look at Coke versus New Coke. Some of us on the call or on this podcast will, remember that whole debacle. But that was, I think, 34 days that cost Coca-Cola $77 million.
Yep.
In today's money, that's $200 million.
That's crazy.
Right? So you make these small decisions, it can be catastrophic to the health of a company.
No,
and,
absolutely.
Not to mention just the normal financial burden to the company and others.
Well, and to your point, and I think this is just one of those entering arguments and why I asked the question is like just that one decision-making process, like can have such grievous impacts across the entire landscape of whatever you're dealing with. And so just keeping that in mind, not only just for yourself, but if your coworkers and everybody you work with, like take the time to do the ORM, right? The operational risk management, go through it, make sure it's there. If you can lock it out and tag it out, get her done. Try not to work on the energized stuff. Obviously we can't always avoid that, and going about it, but even then making sure you're wearing the appropriate PPE and things of that nature. And speaking of PPE, do you think we are over relying on the PPE and the FR gear as a crutch for poor procedural discipline?
So I'll tie that question. That I want to make one comment too.
Absolutely.
Because I feel compelled to say, number one, I was 100% not justified in doing the work energized. I mean, completely, there was not a single justification other than I'm the guy that gets crap done. I wanted to get it done, and it was my mission to do, and by God, I was going to get it done. But I can tell you 95% of the energized electrical stuff that we do as technicians is not justified. Saying to your building manager, hey, we can't shut this panel down to install this breaker, this built-in breaker, because we think that our data center runs through there, right? That's not justification. Right now, if you're at a data center, a 1 million square foot data center, and they say, look, this panel controls a server rack that a doctor goes through to run robotic arms during surgery, maybe you can justify that, right? But I can tell you in a specific case of, people go, well, you can't shut off a transfer switch for a hospital to do maintenance, or whatever, because there's patients in ICU. But I mean, I specific example of a friend of mine, they took that energized electrical work permit that has the risk assessments and all the stuff you need on there to the hospital and said, look, if someone dies during this is on you. You're signing this. And they said, you know what? We're going to move those ICU patients to another ICU temporarily. And they shut it off, right? So almost always where there's a will, there's a way to be safe. The problem is, going right into your question, are we over relying on PPE? I think a lot of times, I think that they say, well, they don't really, okay, and I hate this, the PPE is the last line of defense thing, because there's a lot of tasks, like even operating breakers, turning breakers on and off, do you need PPE?
Yep.
The short answer is yes. I mean, now you obviously common sense needs a rule here. A 20 amp single pole, not so much. But if you need to exercise a breaker once a year like you do, and it's a 400 or a 2000 amp breaker, should you remote rack it or remote switch it? Absolutely. If you don't have that capability, should you wear PPE to that level? 100%, right? And in some cases, if it's a brand new breaker and you're energizing it for the first time, or it has recently been serviced and you're energizing it for the first time, you have to wear it. Right?
Absolutely.
So, but there's a lot of times that people are like, well, I'm just going to throw my PPE on and just throw caution to the wind. And you need to do a risk assessment.
Absolutely.
And the risk assessment breaks all this stuff down and gives you shock and arc flash stuff, right? But you need to mitigate. You need to see, it's part of being qualified, right? Understanding risk and mitigating them, and then knowing what PPE and boundaries and all that stuff. So yes, in my world, PPE I think is imperative. I'm 100% believer in daily wear PPE because you never know, right? But I think that some companies, they don't know how to do the tables method, right, or the category method in here. They haven't had an incident energy study, and those are the only two ways to understand. And so they just go, you know what? I've got a 25 cal suit or a 40 cal suit. I'm just going to put that on. And it's a freaking 75 cal hazard at that panel, and they don't even know it, right? Yeah. And so it's really stupid to fly by the seat of your pants and just think that PPE is going to keep you safe. It will keep you safe when used properly and sized properly and all that stuff. But even with the proper size PPE, I mean, you still could have a second-degree burn and still spend time in the hospital.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's maybe fully recoverable, but
and a lot of that stuff, and to your point, you said it didn't have to be in this particular instance. So what were some of the encumbrances that were driving that for you for not tagging it out? Was it a speed versus or a speed thing getting it done? Because I know it, obviously if you're doing a lotto, it can take a half a day and some, running the tags and doing it the right way and making sure it's all out. And so it sounded like that was an option, but it mainly for efficiency and then just kind of thinking you had it down and probably had some complacency there, right?
Right. So in some cases, like you said, it can be difficult. Let's say you're at a huge factory and you need to do something to the main service bus, right? And you need the utility to shut you down, which is going to require plant shutdown and all that crap, and yes, that can be a huge deal and lots of coordination. But that's not, for my case, that's not what we're talking about here. This is a hotel.
Yeah.
I could have shut the main off.
Yeah.
That killed the branch sections. At like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, said, hey, I need to shut you down for about 20, 30 minutes tops. Cut the tape off the bus bar, bolt that breaker in, and then mitigate the rest of any risk if there was with blankets or whatever to finish the task, right? And energize the place. 30 minutes, right? So in my case, 100% was my makeup is I'm a helper, man. I like to help people. I was taught that way. If you're going back to the truck, take something with you. If someone's walking, ask them to help carry something. That's just my makeup. So part of that is wanting to help the hotel not shut down.
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
Even just taking their thoughts and more than being smart, taking their thoughts into account of, man, I'm just going to get this done because I've done tasks like this so many times in the past. And again, you remember that normalization of deviation I mentioned?
Yep.
When we get to complacency, or we ask me about that, I'll delve into that a little bit more. But there was no reason, not because it was difficult, not because my boss cared more about the bottom line than my safety, or the money more than my safety, or getting the job done more than my safety. There was absolutely no reason why I should not have turned this off, right?
Yep.
Even not locking it out, I was standing right next to the main, right? I mean, not even because it was a hassle, right? I could have just clicked it off, did a live test, put my stuff in, and turned it back on and been on my way. There was zero reasons to do this. Sometimes there's other reasons, like it's too difficult, or generally it's just because I could tell you after 10, 15, 20 years of being an electrician, it's just because they call you a wuss if, come on, man. You know how to put breakers in hot. You've done it 1,000 times.
Right.
You don't need to shut all this off and all that stuff. And usually it's pressure, that causes that. And then eventually, after so much pressure, the complacency is what they just
almost starts with ego, because we always think we're better, right? Like you run in, hey, I'm hot shit. I can knock all this out. We can do 20 of these 100%. In a day. We all feel superhuman, like Superman running around until you're not.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important in highlighting. And that is kind of like getting to the, not even necessarily the complacency, right? Because that's just additional, like humans, we seek efficiency, right? We're always going to take the path of least resistance, if you will.
Sure.
And unless you have those existential or those other circumstances at top of mind and the monetary impacts, and really, I just call it a safety culture, right? Really driving home the tonality and making sure that everybody gets it, because you could be an electrician helper out in the field. Look at the inside and outside linemen, the guys that are up there. I just saw one in a bucket truck the other day where somebody had touched over where they didn't use the insulating blankets on the lines, right? Like little stuff like that exists, and everything that we do is written in blood, right? It's always it's gotten somebody. Right. And then we fall into that it ain't going to happen to me mindset. And then when it does, we know the outcomes, and that to me is kind of like summarizing that in a nutshell, probably a little bit too generally, but to me, a lot of that comes down to the human nature of it.
Right. I'd say the definition of complacency is self-satisfaction, especially when accompanied by a complete unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies.
I like
Right.
that. I think that's
And
spot.
the synonyms are big-headed, arrogant, smug, proud, egotistical, all those. Right. So yeah, you're pretty much, as an electrician, we're an arrogant bunch.
Just like
right?
military, same thing applies, right? A
Yeah,
bunch
we're
of people that
cocky,
are
we're
chest
arrogant,
bumping and yep.
yeah, I can tell you that and there's always going to be a bit of it ain't bragging if you can back it up mentality in this industry,
Absolutely.
and that's great if it pushes you towards safer principles and procedures and policies. But complacency kind of works like this, and I put a picture up, and maybe you'll get it or you'll put it up there. But
Absolutely.
so you imagine a mouse in a maze, and you see the mouse, jumping over. You'll see the picture there. The mouse jumping over a wall halfway through the maze to get the cheese. So here you are. Well, I'm just going to, use an electrician as an example. I got to get into this breaker panel right here. I know that I need PPE to get in there. Anytime I expose energized parts, our safety manager said anytime you pull an energized cover, you have to have PPE, right? It's listed on there, whatever it is. So, but damn, my PPE is 2 miles away in a job trailer on this data center. Man, I've done this a million times. I'm not even going to do any work. I'm just going to look and see what kind of breakers are in here, get some part numbers, and I'm going to get in and out. It's only going to take a second. All these phrases. And you pull the cover off, you do it, you put it back on. Absolutely. 95% of the time, it's more efficient. It's faster, easier, cooler. Nobody knew about it. Nobody got hurt. You're in and out, and you're on to the next task, right? But just like that mouse, once that mouse figures out how to cut that corner halfway through the maze and get that cheese, do you think that mouse is going any other direction?
Absolutely
no
not.
way.
Yep.
So every time you come up to this panel, you're going to do that. In your brain, you remember getting the cheese and going, man, that was a lot easier, right, and faster. And you'll see in my PowerPoint, or when you saw, I think you sat in that webinar,
I did.
We don't keep jumping off of 25-foot cliffs, do we? As human beings, we go to 75 or 125 and we die, right? You're going to push the envelope.
Absolutely.
So you're not going to just stop at this stupid task.
You got away with it the first time, so why would you not continue?
You're flipping dominoes, man. You're going to keep going to the next task, and the next task. I mean, how many of you kept jumping off of a 1 foot ramp with your Huffy or your Schwinn, right? You did. I mean, you mastered it. You thought you were qualified, and you moved it to a 2 foot ramp, and you wiped the hell out, right? And moved it back to a 1 foot ramp. So complacency is to me, it's kind of the final nail in the coffin. I mean, of course, you can root cause all the way back to policies and procedures and all that. But even with the best policies and procedures, so you can have a company with the absolute best CEO and safety culture all the way down to the lowest technician, and people can still die at work, right? Because of that last decision that was made, because that guy was complacent. I don't need those damn rules. I've been doing this for 30 years. And conversely, you could have the absolute worst company CEO all the way down that doesn't give a crap about their employees, and you can still go home safe every day as the bottom technician in that company because you made good decisions.
And it ultimately, the onus falls squarely on the shoulders of the technician,
100%.
the electrician, whoever it may be. And to your point, so we've talked pretty heavily about complacency. What can we do to fight complacency in the workspace?
I think I'm a firm believer in you get what you inspect, not what you expect, right? If you can burn that into your brain, that falls under the audits that are required in the 70E. You're required to go out and do a field work audit once a year, lockout, tagout, and a field work audit. Every 3 years, you got to do safety training because the 70E changes every 3 years. You're required to update your safety program every 3 years because the 70 comes out. Your lockout, tagout has to be updated every 3 years. Stickers, 5 years, and then new employees or new situations, current training, right? So my opinion, 100% is awareness training. Like if you are on top of your employees understand the hazards at work and how to mitigate those, the risks and the hazards, because there's a risk and hazard. The risk, you stop at a 4-way stop sign, right? And you look in both ways, that's a risk assessment, right? The car's coming, it's doing 100 miles an hour. The car is the hazard, right? Is the car doing 100? It's high hazard. There's a risk, but it's high hazard risk, right? And then if that car's slowing down, then it's low risk, right? Still a hazard present,
Right.
or the car's the hazard, and whether it's high risk or low risk. So if your people understand risk and risk assessments, and that's done with training and awareness, that's going to help a lot. But you as a EHS safety manager, whatever you call it at your company, is going to have to get out in the field, not as a gotcha, but as a training, right? You want to bring employees up into the right quadrant so they're doing the right thing. So that's my biggest thing is you don't want to beat them to death with citations and violations, and you don't want to beat them to death with training, but you need to have relevant, field specific training, right?
Absolutely.
And like in your daily safety, and I've already kind of talked to the ORM. It's very similar to what we did in the military for operational risk management. It's probability and severity. What's the likelihood of how it's of it happening, and how bad will it be, and then whatever the outcomes will be, and then we assign a yellow, green, red, kind of wherever it falls out.
Yep.
And now additional eyes are on it. And I'll give an example of using an unrep, right? Very, very dangerous thing out at sea. 2 boats getting gas in stores, you hook up with lines across. And so we have a cadence before every unrep, before going in and out of port. All the key decision makers all have to get together. There's an ORM discussion. We cover the track, discuss the what ifs, right? What if we have a Type 4 Iranian boat coming towards us while we're doing this? What do we do? Initiate emergency breakaway, stand up general quarters, go out, get ready to, defend everybody in that. Or, what if there's a loss of steering, a loss of propulsion, sea state, all these other variables, and you have to weigh that. And it's done right before the instance of training so that it's on the top of mind for everybody. And it seems like, having not worked in the industry, but the daily safety briefs that it should be done, or the job site analysis and briefs that happen, is that typically a part of that construct that you see used out there?
Sure. Yeah, I think with any risky task, and sounds like you were Navy. My dad was Navy.
I was.
He was on USS Raleigh. So yeah, thanks for your service.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, I think with any risky anything, in the 70s, good about talking about this. So is OSHA. You need to have a pre-job planning meeting, right?
Absolutely.
Your risk assessment also, when you're doing an energized electric work permit, if you're in my world, if you're doing something energized, that's the highest risk. If you're opening panels, high risk. You need to fill out an EEWP. It's going to break down, who you notify.
That's your energized electrical work plan, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Your energized electric work permit.
Permit.
Is going to talk about, it's going to have your electric shock risk assessment and your arc flash, but it's also going to talk about job briefing.
Yep.
Who else is going to, who's going to be there. It can be really complicated. It can be short. But I think that if you're doing something risky, certainly 2 things. One, you need to start the process before you do anything, and say, hey, look, man, here's your responsibility. Here's mine. If something happens, you're going to be the one grabbing the fire extinguisher, making the phone call. You've planned your egress, ingress. I could give you countless examples of people who've gotten injured and died, that survived, but then died because they couldn't get out of there with emergency equipment. Right? They just couldn't get it in time. And so having a plan is paramount. And that's the JSAs, the job safety analysis, or, job briefings. They're called a
bunch of different things.
Yeah. Every industry has their own name for them, but pre-job planning essentially is what it is.
Yeah.
And super important.
Absolutely. But even outside of the formal, right? Those are more formal, codified, thou shalt do's per the regulations. There's nothing stopping from you and your helper getting together and formulating a quick game plan on site, right? Because that ORM is dynamic. It's just not tied to an event. You can use it to your example of the 4-way stop and looking at it, right? You and whoever's with you. And I think nowadays we see less one-offs with an individual technician being deployed out. We're usually seeing them run in teams, especially when it comes to live work, so you can rope up and have safety and verify the cowl suit's there and not punctured. But work through that process with that individual. Okay, hey, brother, we're getting ready to do some really gnarly stuff over here. I'm going to wear the cowl suit. I got the wrap. You got me to where, what are the isolation procedures? How the hell are you going to get me out of here? Do you know who to call? All that. That's a 3-minute conversation before you start the work, just solidifying pucker factor stuff. And if crap goes wrong, right? And making sure, and just that little bit of planning, right? They may freeze in the moment, but you at least address some of those core things. And I think that also reinforces that culture of safety, if that makes sense. And do you see that being done in the field? Is that a typical thing amongst you? You got plenty of time out there. Is that something that usually happens before working a project?
It's usually cowboys out there. Honestly, I can tell you the 70E, my understanding from what I've heard is that they're going to go to a 2-man deal if you're working energized, like you said, because I was out there on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of that, if you have employees that believe in the culture, if you have a good safety culture and people believe in it, and that's a culture where it isn't a gotcha, it's like, hey, man, I want to see you go home to your family tonight,
Absolutely.
right? It's going to hurt my heart in this company if you get killed at work, right? And I don't want to see that. Not because it cost me a bunch of money or anything like that. I just want to see you go home to your wife and kids, or your husband and kids, or whatever it is. Whatever it is, right? So you got to have a good culture. But I think part of it is, even before you have that pre-job planning, and this can go back to your root cause, is your policies and procedures of the company. Saying, look, we have a no gray area safety policy here. You will not work energized unless you call so-and-so and so-and-so, and we talk it through any kind of risk, whatever, and you're going to fill out a risk assessment, whether it's on an iPad with our app or whatever, however you do it. But you need to have a rock solid plan and your policies and procedures. And then again, you get what you inspect, not what you expect. You follow through with field visits and site visits to make sure, you're doing it. Your safety people also need to have experience.
Absolutely.
I can tell you the biggest grumbling out there in the field is you got a bunch of 30, 40, 50-year-old electricians who've been in the field for 10, 20, 30 years. And you got some kids.
Fresh-faced
I
kid.
say kids because I'm 55, right? I can do that now because my kids are 23 and 19. So you got some 23-year-old kid that has just graduated with a good safety degree. I mean, he's a smart kid, but there's no application, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
He's not stupid, or he or she is not stupid, but they're ignorant.
Right.
They don't know what they don't know out there. And you can learn and retrain it. You can train out ignorance, right? Stupidity, the Darwin Award usually takes.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to have a good safety culture, you got to talk about it with policies and procedures up front. Talk about it later with your risk assessments. And if you've got a person that's in charge, they need to be able to connect with those individuals out there in the field. And I think if you do those three things, you have a much higher likelihood of not having accidents on the job.
No, agree with you. And I want to highlight just one of our clients. I won't mention them by name, but they actually just had a lead that didn't complete a JSA, got called out on it, and was let go for that reason. So again, it's another mechanism to use, right? And enforcing it. Hey, you don't do this, you're not going to be with us anymore. And I think that's also a very valid thing. And I felt bad for the guy, but ultimately, I mean, he made the decision not to do the JSA, right? So it's one of those things where if you're enforcing that culture of safety, that is also the stick and carrot. You're more stick on this one, but knowing there's ramifications outside of the possibility of death, which should be all you need. But holding that as part of your culture and taking action where it's needed and deemed fit. And I think you reinforce that way by not letting people get away with stuff. And it was a very senior individual.
You remember those dominoes I talked about? So one of the key ways that you can keep a company safe is near miss and close call reporting.
Absolutely.
And I get the snitches get stitches, but you got to figure out a way to do that. Again, not as a gotcha, but those dominoes, if you could pull a domino out of the middle of somebody's string before you get to that fatality or that SIF, that serious injury fatality deal, you might save their life. In many cases, you might save others, right? Now, if you've got to keep pulling dominoes out of somebody's string, you got to cut them loose, man. They're going to kill themselves or somebody else, and you need to help them succeed somewhere else.
Absolutely. And that's a culture of feedback, to your point. And this is another one where I always lean into my military experience, because we have all these codified things in place, right, that are kind of like, we've been doing it since, forever, a couple hundred years worth now. So, but it was literally, we'd sit in CIC, and to your point of training and making sure you're ready before you ever dispatch and go out. We called it the deployment or the Battle of Norfolk, right? Whenever you're there, because your training cycle is so arduous. You're in combat. You're running scenarios where ICBMs and, the big bear bombers are launching at you. and you're running through it, and it's made to really put you through the maximum amount to where you're just saturated, task saturated. You would go what's called Winchester, where you literally blow through all of the missiles on your DDG in these scenarios. And so comms get wild and everything. But again, we're planning to the chaos, right, of the potential of what could happen. And inevitably, you knew what was going to happen. So, you get a 5-minute breather. Everybody goes to the head, use the restroom, come back, regroup. And then we debrief every scenario by every watch station down to the lowest man on the totem pole and showing. And then they get their moment in the spotlight, good, bad, or indifferent, right? But it's not a chew you up, spit you out. It's okay. Right. This is what happened. You gooned up X, Y, and Z. Got it? What can we do to fix that and make it better for you? Now let's go run it again and run it again and run it again until we get everybody on the same page. And then whenever it's time to finally deploy, now you're ready to go to the tip of spear and execute the strategy. So, and it plays to that point as well. And again, I say all that to say, I think it's more of just a culture of feedback, right? And this is one of those things that a lot of people, because again, you're dealing with a bunch of high testosterone individuals that run around wanting to do, thinking they're the baddest thing since sliced bread. And unless you get them acclimated to that culture, I think you're missing a pivotal point to that. And so, so to your point of getting the lessons learned, I think that is definitely something that would be salient for EPCs out there or whoever's doing the work. If you haven't, or you're still evaluating your safety program, it's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be fun to talk about, right? You got to work through all this stuff because of the impacts it can have. And to the point of us doing it in the military, it's life and death, right? It's 300 people on a ship. You got to make sure that those individuals know, and it's no different in this particular instance.
It's true. I've had a lot of like shooting training, and it's one of those things. You understand that the main reason they do these things 1,000 times in a row is because when the crap hits the fan, you're about 75% likely to do it right instead of 1%, right? Because the muscle memory just kicks in and you've done it. But, thankfully, too, you mentioned it. It came to mind. You mentioned a high testosterone. That's why women live longer than men, right?
Absolutely.
We've got a lot of pretty tough ladies in the electrical industry now. And they don't get arc flash like guys do. I think they just think through processes maybe a little bit better, don't have that machismo that we do. As much like, just whatever, so yeah, at least I'm pleased to see that, and
agreed,
kind of filling in the safety gaps. But yeah, I think it's hard to train for installing breakers, energized, but certainly you can sit down in a room once a year and say, hey, we just want to refresh everyone's memory about working energized.
Power Relay with Micah Clay. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to like, subscribe, and leave a review. For more insights, contact info, job offerings, and other content, check out our Linktree sites at Linktree/Micah W. Clay or Linktree/Southern Staffing. We'd love to hear any feedback, and if you know anyone we should highlight, feel free to drop us a message. As always, thanks to those who work tirelessly to keep the lights on. Until next time.
Absolutely.
So, and it's okay not to be okay, right? I mean, you could have just lost a spouse. Your mom or dad could have died. Hell, you could even have lost a pet, or something. And in this day and age, you got a lot of states where you might be high, right? Or still drunk from the night before or whatever, right? So it's important, like you said, with the extra people there now, 2 people teams or 3 or 4 or whatever, to be able to spot those human performance distractions and say, you know what, man, I'm going to switch your task, right?
Absolutely.
And it's important when you do a risk assessment, and I thought of this and didn't bring it up a few minutes ago, but when you're going through those tasks, right, if something in the middle of that risk assessment changes, you need to stop.
Absolutely,
right?
and reassess.
We need to stop, and we need to regroup. This is different than we thought. We found a bunch of loose parts in here, and if we touch this, whatever. Just whatever it is, you need to stop and redo that and make sure you're still on track for a safe outcome.
No, and to your point, I can see, and you see it all the time, and I think it's indicative of what happened to you, right? You saw a couple of those where 2 of those buses were very close to each other. That might have been a good trigger to say, okay, well, this is going to be a little bit more spicy than I thought, right? But again, proving furthermore, if you had a forceful backup or something like that on site, somebody else, it may have been able to been that conscious in your ear, right? So there was a bunch of it, kind of maybe, you don't know.
Maybe, because what the world looks like is you're going to have an experienced guy with an apprentice.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's like having a private with a sergeant. And they're not, I mean, they're like, hey, you know, they might say,
it's a brutal
hey, they might
conundrum for
say,
sure.
if they've got stones, they'll go, hey, Sarge, you sure we should do it? Yeah, I'm good.
Shut up,
Okay.
shut up and get back in
They're not gonna push.
formation type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's because it's one of those. I was in a meeting one time, and the guy said, "How many of you feel or have enough confidence to stop work on a job site?" And then a bunch of people, and he goes, "That's bullcrap. None of you."
Yeah, absolutely.
You say that, but you know, only a few even would do that. So
Yep.
the unfortunate reality is, a lot of times you're going to have a less experienced person, and one of the really bad parts about that is, and I tell everybody, I said, you'll never know how many people's lives you're going to save by working safely.
Mhm.
Because if you're an experienced journeyman or master or whatever you're union or not union, and you've got an apprentice with you, they're watching you, right? And if you're doing it unsafe, they're going to do it unsafe.
Yep.
And this is generations that you're going to affect,
Yep.
right? Especially if somebody dies, right? You're going to affect their family literally generations wise. So yeah, you really still got to, man, it's a real tough nut to crack, even with two people out there.
No doubt.
But again, you should have a policy and a procedure where you say, hey guys, when you get out on a job site, talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Talk about this. And if you're an experienced guy, your blinders are like this now, right?
Yep.
Because of all that normalization and deviation.
Absolutely.
You've got so many bullets over here. Now you think you're bulletproof. And, you know, if you can't listen to an apprentice give you a piece of advice, you got to check yourself. Right?
Absolutely. And to your point, it's a mountain to climb. I mean, to try to get that level of buy-in, but can it be done? Look at Toyota and their ability, and under the Kaizen, the lowest person on the totem pole has the ability to stop work. And I think that's probably a bit more of a macro cultural consideration, right? So, because to your point, like if it's the company and they're not out there, do you have a feedback loop to where that apprentice could go up one level up above to address it and try to, again, it's snitches and stitches, right? But could it ultimately impact to the positive, to the safety culture and all those things? You hope you never have to go that route, but if the mechanism is there, the master electrician knows about it, right? And knows that the apprentice has that ability. That's at least another one of those stick type situations to where you could possibly help. But again, I'm not the electrician, just using some of that, the case study type stuff, if you will. So it is definitely not an easy one to overcome.
You might say, as a journeyman, you might say, cool story, bro. Get back to work.
Exactly.
You know, but at least listen, right? You know, you may kick him out, but look at you using the big Kaizen word. So that's what my wife does. She's Lean Six Sigma, Kaizen, Pokio, Compass Room. That's all her stuff, man. So she's going to Toyota in 2 weeks. They're walking through that whole root cause. She's in charge of the business system for GE Aerospace and their avionics division.
That is wild. It's literally the exact same conversation. And to that point, very applicable to her industry as well, because it's universal in application, right? So that is awesome.
Yeah, they even fly them. So GE, they fly them out to Japan. I can't remember the guy's name who's the godfather of that, Lean and Six Sigma, all that stuff. But they do a thing a couple times a year out there. It's pretty cool.
That is awesome.
So, yeah, you can get in the weeds with the root cause problem solving, guys. Most electricians in the field don't care or want to know about that. I try to, what affects them is the complacency generally. They're just like, I've done this. And I speak from experience.
Yep.
Not because I think anybody's not smart out there, but just because I know the callus I got on my brain, saying I've done this a bunch of times and it gets you eventually.
No, absolutely. And then kind of getting back to the question. So it seems that there has been a heavy emphasis placed on the 70 Echo from the perspective of the stakeholders I speak to frequently, and that's including SMEs and CEOs and all that other good stuff. From your view now at Tyndale, though, how would you rate the industry's current training standards on electrical safety as a whole, even outside of the 70 Echo, and on a score like a 1 through 10?
Man, that's tough because, some will be a 1 and some will be 11. You know what I mean? So some would just be too much. I've got a lot of clients that you don't even need arc flash PPE until you go over 1.2 calories in this book. They've had studies done, so they know what the actual calorie level is, but they don't care if it's 1.2 cals or 39.9. You're in a 40 cal suit, period, right? And that's, you're allowed to do that. It's a little knee jerk. So some people are overly safe, and sometimes I've seen, some companies like laundry companies that provide PPE, they overcompensate just because they don't really understand the process. That they give a company that is 12208 or 277 480 volt yellow gloves, and they're stiff, right? You can't work it. You don't need that voltage level. They're overcompensating for shock at the expense of arc flash and stuff like that. So anyway, where I was going with that, I totally got.
No, just on the overall, the industry safety standards outside of the 70
so companies, yeah. So there's a lot of companies I see nowadays that are trying to be very safe and very proactive, getting this training every 3 years like they're supposed to. In my opinion, and I'm a 70E nerd and think that the NFPA documents are the greatest thing since sliced bread because I live in them.
Right.
But I worked under the 70 for years, right? It's the National Electric Code. It's what all my work was judged on by the city, right. The authorities having jurisdiction, right? So I love that publication. The 70 is what I live in, and the 70B, and actually the 79 is another one.
I'm not familiar with the 70I.
Yeah, the 79. I thought I had it in here somewhere. I know I got it in here somewhere. The 79 is there it is. It's a much smaller, it's a smaller, but it's electrical standard for industry machinery. So it's very similar to the 70B. But those four, I love those documents. So, I live in them, right? But the 70, why wouldn't you use that for your electrical safety program? It's the who right? It's the standard for electrical safety in the workplace, right? You don't have to use 1910, 269 or NESE if you're a lineman. You could use the 70. You don't have to use any of them, but you got to use something that meets or exceeds all of these documents. You have to audit it, train it, provide PPE, et cetera, right? But I think a lot of companies now and insurance companies are requiring, the 70B maintenance stuff now, the thermal scans and all that kind of stuff. They're requiring that for insurance discounts or to get a competitive rate. If they're not a safe company, you're much more likely to have an accident. And so a lot of people in different areas are starting to understand that. Dude, the OSHA, they approached NFPA to write that document in like 79, I think.
I believe that's if I recall correctly.
Yeah, they've been using it since 1983. So it is, although OSHA, like a quote is, they don't enforce the 70, but they use it to support all their citations and violations, which means they enforce it.
Exactly.
Right? Exactly. So use that is the standard, right? And so, and a lot of their verbiage mirrors what you see in there.
And a lot of that stuff, and a lot of people don't realize the ties between like IEEE and all the various IEEE, NFPA, and I'm struggling to think of a couple UL and all the different standards that are out there.
NETA and ESC and all the different organizations are all
and all that. Yeah. So, and it kind of all and a lot of people are picking and choosing depending on the industry that's specific, but there's tons of that. But the crazy thing is, I just had a codes and standards conversation a couple of interviews back, and it was literally discussing how they all feed off of each other. Like the working groups that are over at IEEE are informing the outcomes of the 70 Echo and Bravo and everything else. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the curtain to make sure that the standards are somewhat universal in application for the particular use case.
Yeah, the IEEE, you couldn't do arc flash studies without them, right? Mm-hmm. They're the 1584. They write that publication that gives you the smoke and mirrors and calculations on how to figure that out. Absolutely. And then the 70, has a lot of notes that refers to a lot of different stuff. And then all of the NFPA documents, those, at least the three-legged stool of the 70, 70, and 70B, they all refer to each other, right?
Absolutely.
And the definitions are all, they're all virtually the same unless there's specific additions that would be in the 70 that need to be in that definition, but they're all virtually the same and they're all in the same locations. And, Article 100 is definitions, it's a trilogy, if you will, that you need to really follow through with.
So I guess in summation of that question, it's basically, it really is hit or miss, and it depends. And I think a lot of that's probably going to be driven about how much of a safety culture a company is driven around, or I would say in a particular instance, if they've had an injury or an accident all of a sudden the pucker factor is high, and now it's become a safety standard of safety because they've now had an impactful situation that deals with. Is that pretty accurate?
I mean, you could be talking about pickup truck electric with 2 guys.
Yep.
You know, or you could be talking about a Rosendin with 4,000 guys, right? Or whatever, you know, across the country. I mean, there's just it just all depends on a lot of different factors and culture. My feeling, and to be clear, I mean, I'm saturated in it because people approach me for training and keynotes. The people that I talk to want to be safe.
Right.
You know what I mean? I've got this year alone have over 90 speaking engagements scheduled.
Wow.
So that gives me the feeling that all these people want to be safer, right? Because they're trying to bring someone in who has a story that'll help them their people work safer. So I'm kind of it's kind of hard.
You're
for me
operating in your silo. It's like me being on LinkedIn expecting everybody to be there because I'm a freaking recruiter, right?
Yeah. You say, hey, do you see a lot of do you see people in war? You know, well, I'm not on the Gaza Strip. You know what I mean? I'm in Kansas City. So I'm going to say no, but you ask somebody over there, they're going to say, oh my God, it's never ended, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it really kind of depends on if you're you know, a lot of different things. So
no, absolutely,
it's hard for me to put a number on that.
No, I get it. And this one's kind of like I know we've discussed a lot of this stuff, but as someone who's trained both apprentices and consulted for the multi-million-dollar operations, where do you find that you have the most struggle with your message landing, if that makes sense? So is it with the technicians? Is it leadership? Is it who is your hardest to train individuals, I guess?
I'll tell you one thing that I'm the most satisfied with my career, or where I'm at right now, is that, so I would sit through trainings, I mean, for 30 years to keep my licensing up and all that stuff. You had to have CEUs 8 hours a year or whatever. And God, we all hated it, right? Absolutely. The electricians were just like, "Oh, kill me now," right? I've heard all this. The presenter's an engineer, and you know what I'm talking about there. It's just maybe no field experience. Whatever it is, it's just terrible. One of the things that is great is that because I've been an electrician for so long and had almost 40 years of construction, right? I know how to talk to those people, whether you're a CEO or you're nailing up boxes, right? In a residential electrical setting, I can hang with the best or the worst, right? And I'm a CESCP, so that gives me some street cred with the EHS crowd and 70E training and all that stuff. And I got blown up, right? And so I've got a story that oh man, he got blown up, right? So those 3 things, instead of me being the guy that walks in the room full of electricians, the guy that they say, this guy doesn't know crap, right? At least I start at 0 and not negative, right? So it gives me a leg up. So I'm able to talk, whether they're CEO or EHS, everybody, in my opinion, deserves respect, and I don't talk down to anybody. I mean, they're all a cog in the wheel, right? Absolutely. People will say, "Well, I'm just," and I go, "Look, dude, you're not just you're part of that. You're part of the thing, right? Without you, then it struggles, right?
Your job exists for a reason, right?
Yeah,
like
somebody deemed it reasonable. You're not just this, right? So I don't have a ton of trouble, but I think in general, you've got. This is generally speaking, not all examples. You've got, a foreman or a JW out there, and you've got apprentices, and you definitely, you have a little attitude, you're more arrogant, we're cocky, you're cowboys, whatever. And maybe you don't explain things to apprentices. There are some great journeymen out there that will take the time and train and bring their people up. I've seen gobs of them, right? But I think in the old days when I came up, in the early 90s, I say the old days, we didn't have sensitivity training. We didn't have DEI. We didn't have all that stuff. Yeah. There was no feelings, no F's given about any of your feelings. You just, suck it up, buttercup, and get your job done.
Absolutely.
And I think generally we're doing a little better about, hey, you need to train your people so that you're not as pissed off about them not knowing how to do things. It's your fault, man. Teach them how to carry something, and they'll carry it for you. Don't scream at them.
Well, and I think that kind of aligns with what I was thinking. Is like that's why I asked the question. It's like, because it seems like the ones that have been in the space that are set in their ways, And I have those conversations with some hot shots, right? Hey,
it used to be.
I want to bring in
Used to
X,
be
Y, and Z to
active.
come evaluate this, right? And then it's like, well, I want it done my way. Well, your way is your way. That doesn't mean it's in accordance with the
Right.
codes and standards.
It used to be a lot more reactive, right?
Exactly.
You
Vice Pro.
dumbass.
Yep.
You know, and just screaming at somebody, and they're like, "I'm never doing that again," right? And now we're starting to be a little bit more active.
Yeah,
And just
absolutely.
say, "Look, man, hey, we're getting ready to walk over there, grab something." And when you come back to the truck to get more material, like I'm going to ask you later,
Yeah.
take something back with you, right? And you might have to remind them once, and then the third time you scream at them, but whatever, you know what I mean? But you know, you give them, at least you give them enough, you know, line and hooks and bait to catch something, you know, instead of just sitting them out there with a fishing pole and no hook.
Absolutely. No, that hit the spot on. And I mean, for the guests that are out there, if you are that seasoned individual and you're not taking credence in what we're talking about, it may be a point of reflection for you to kind of think, hey, I might not be living up to my fullest potential and offering the tutelage that our understudies deserve, you know, and kind of thing. So
Right.
I can imagine that kind of being a fight. And then, so on to this one. So for the young guns coming in the trade, so we've already kind of addressed the shortage in talent and all that other good stuff. But a lot of these guys and gals, obviously, I was 18 at one point, as were you, and we were young and dumb and felt invincible or bulletproof. What would you say to those guys before they suit up, or better yet, what would you tell the younger pre-accident version of yourself to drive that point home?
There's two things. There's two things that if you don't get this right, you have no career in the trades. Number one, shut the and listen, right? I mean, listen to the people that have been doing it for a while.
Yep.
Right? If you think you know more than that guy, you got, I mean, you may know more, but it's better to be thought of an idiot than open your mouth and remove all doubt, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So just listen, right?
God gave us two of these, and one of these for a reason, right? So
take it in, man. You know what I mean? Watch, take it in. Don't ask a lot of stupid questions, because you might see it if you're quiet for enough time. You probably go, "Oh, that's how they were doing it," right? That's number one. Two is God is paramount, especially in this day and age. And I don't know how old you are, but you'll respect this. I mean, we're both bald and gray-haired beards. Yeah. So I'm sure you'll get it. I tell people, man, I've got one feeling left, and it's pretty calloused, right? I worked in construction for 40 years. If you go in there and you whine and your feelings get hurt all the time, especially in the construction industry, you have got a hard life coming your way, man. Because I can tell you, if you get sensitive about something, it's gonna happen.
It's like it's shark bait, basically. Yep, you're about to get ate up.
That's the guy we need to bust his chops every day now. Absolutely. Right. You need to suck it up, man, and understand. And again, I'm not talking about everybody. This is my personal experience.
Absolutely.
But I can tell you, the construction industry is full of bullies, right? I mean, in general. And it's been known as a bunch of tough guys who work, sometimes 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, rain, shine, and it's a tough freaking job. And you need to be tough to do it. Whether you're a man or woman doing it, it takes some toughness, right? And that's not just the physical part of it. That's the mental part of it. That's the emotional part of it, right? You need to understand that most of the time, these people in the industry, no matter all over, and no matter what job you're in, don't really care that much about you. It's not about you, right? Everybody's working together as a unit to get this job done. Now, some I can tell you in some, circles with electrical, and it's even called a brotherhood, right?
Yep.
I mean, you are a brotherhood. Military, you watch out for each other. And if somebody outside that circle tries to start crap, you know how it goes. But I just say, man, if you could cut the sensitivity, like Gen Zers have a little bit more of a problem with that than Gen Xers do. And I'm not saying everybody, so I'm not including everybody here. And I don't care if you're man, woman, or straight, gay, what's your preference. I don't give a crap about any of that. Electrical safety applies to no matter who you are,
right?
No matter how you feel about whatever. I don't care how you feel about whatever. You just gotta not be sensitive, and you gotta listen and want to learn. And if you do those two things, you will kick ass in this industry, and you will move up quickly, right? And you'll get to a spot to where you're making great money and support a wife and kids at home, and look back on your career like I have after, 30 years ago, that was a good career, man.
I feel you very much. And a lot of what you're saying echoes a lot of what we see in the military, right? It's the same thing.
Right.
And those that just kind of, you can quietly do business very well. Squeaky wheel's typically going to get the grease. To your point, if you're that emotional person, we're going to lock onto it, right? Because you're toxic to the rest of the team and the cohesion. And so we hire, and like I said, that's one of the things we recruit to is culture fit, right? So that's one of those things, and we can elicit the responses that we're looking for through certain question sets and all that other good stuff. And I'm not going to shut you down and call you a wuss or anything. I want to say, like, look, this is what you're walking into. Is this the situation or environment that you want to be put in? Because the industry is not going to change for you. That is what we're seeing. And like I said, I've been out in the field, been in substations and all over the place and all that. And these are hardworking folks. Like, they're out there, they're very no nonsense, and you're going to get it done. And you almost have to be, because you don't have time for all this superfluous extra crap when you're dealing with stuff that, where safety is the primary driver for everything you're doing. So, and it has to be in that level of danger. So I couldn't agree with you more. And then to that point, same question, but for the older folks that have been in it. So those foremen that are out there, and we kind of touched on that, but what would you give those guys, right? We obviously see a gap in some of that training out there, right? To our point of having the conversation, the journeyman, shut the hell up type of thing, get back to it, apprentice. What advice would you give to those guys?
I'd say, speaking as an old guy now, it's, patience isn't my strong suit. Even after, my life, I still have to work on that. And it's tough. I tell you, I'm not saying the greatest electrician ever lived, man, but I had the opportunity and the blessing, because I did have some motivation, that I worked in every aspect, literally every aspect, whether commercial, industrial, or, residential, AV, fire alarm, plus all the other stuff, project management and estimating and all that stuff, right? Just because I wanted to learn the different aspects of it, right? And so, again, that tends, when you know a lot about the electrical trade, you tend to become a know-it-all. And I suffer from that, like a lot of other foremen or journeymen that have been out there for a lot of years. And probably the biggest piece of advice, speaking from experience, is just you got to have some patience, right? You're going to get out what you put into your people.
Absolutely.
And if you put in crap, you're going to get crap, right? If you put in anger, you're going to get attitude, right? If you put in insults, you're going to get no respect, right? So it's the whole golden rule: treat others like you want to be treated. I get it, man. There's some youngsters that are new, and you're just like, God dang, I've already said this like 5 times. Right? We've gone over this. And my wife puts it so perfectly and eloquently, is that common sense is not a flower that grows in everybody's garden, right? And there's times where my boss and I, that worked for 20 years, brilliant guy, right? Super smart, common sense wise, everything. And I was a production manager, and I was in charge of some hiring and firing there and all that. And we'd sit and talk about exit interviews with employees or getting ready to fire an employee. And I'd say, I just don't get why they don't see that. And he's like, look, man, there are some people that don't think like you think, right? They're just people that don't think like you think. So there's people out there with a lot of common sense, and they don't understand, and I still don't sometimes, that some people just don't understand stuff, right? And you're like, I don't understand why, but they just don't, right? So that requires a huge amount of patience, which is even smaller in the construction industry, because everyone,
the pace, and it's the pace of movement out there. Nobody's sitting around on their ass waiting on the next step, right? You got to get it done. So
a lot of screaming, a lot of anger. And I always say, my general foreman, I always say, he was a badass general foreman. He's pissed off all the time, like they all are. There's just some things.
Stereotype for sure.
Yeah, it's some character traits that you just have grown to know and love. And if you're working with somebody who's really, you don't understand too, these, like some of the older guys they're in charge. You're a general foreman or you're a project manager, and this guy's out here in the field. They don't understand what you got going on in your head right now. Absolutely. Just the reports that you got to go, the projections that you have to do as a PM, and you're thinking, okay, they're putting windows in this day, they're doing this, we
Right.
need to dig that trench. I got this subcontractor that I got to get scheduled. They don't really get that you don't have time for a lot of BS.
Right.
Right. You need to give me the guy version. Like, I just need a few caveman words and I'm good. Thanks. Right. And when somebody wants to explain how they feel about something, you're just like, I don't have time for this, man.
Right.
So trying to temper that in construction is probably the thing that the older generation.
Well, and I can tell you from the recruiting perspective on this one. And so a lot of that from the journeyman level, foreman level, they'll take that gruffness into an interview for a new role, and it gets them shut down before they ever get out of the gates because nobody wants to hire the know-it-all guy, right? So that's another purview to look at it from us on the recruiting side. And I don't control who gets what, right? It's up to the clients at that point. And some of the feedback we get, and I don't think it's ageism per se, right? Like, it's not because they're old.
No.
It's because they're set in their ways, and it's my way or the highway, and they express that in the interviews, right? Like, come on, man. So. But I mean, it's still indicative of who they are as a person, and that probably wasn't the appropriate hire. But that's some food for thought for those foreman types. Is you still have to be receptive and treat it as if you don't know everything, even though you've got 3 decades in the industry or 4 decades in the industry. There's always more, especially when it comes to power, new technology coming out all the time, right? We're dealing with IBR, we're dealing with smart grid stuff, we're dealing with all this new tech that's out there. There's always something that can be learned. Not a single person on earth that I can think of knows everything there is to deal with electrical. So there's always something to learn. You just kind of have that mindset.
Yeah. On the techie side, I spent a couple of years in the VDC BIM, virtual construction, the pre-construction. And, I saw I spent a couple of years in there. It was enough to know I didn't want to do that, for a living, but it was really cool.
Yep.
And there's a lot of really great people that are amazing at that. And it was a really good experience to understand it. One of the struggles was some of the older guys are like, I don't want to fly through a model on my iPad.
Yep.
Right. I just want to put my rack right here, and that's where it's going. And they're like, no, it's not. You're coordinating with plumbing and HVAC and fire alarm and fire sprinkler and everything else. And we're going to coordinate it. And you're going to put your rack over there.
Absolutely.
Because you can bend your conduit and that fire pipe can or whatever.
Absolutely.
So it's,
and adaptation, to your point, right? Because it is an ever evolving space. So you have to adapt to the change as well. You're going to get left
100%.
behind.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Well, my friend, we are at an hour and 27 minutes here. So I'm going to open up the floor for any last minute thoughts, anything else you want to share as final conclusions, or anything else that you think is relevant to the talk?
I don't think so, man. We covered a lot of ground in an hour.
We did cover a lot of ground in an hour and a half. It was an absolute blast.
No, good stuff.
It was definitely fantastic.
I'll send you some stuff that you can tack into this, so the viewers can see some actual stuff. And no, I just like my keynote is titled "Don't Be Me." I was the cocky, arrogant, know-it-all electrician who just wanted to get things done, and it cost me, right? And that's why my thing is called "Don't Be Me," because you don't want to be me, right? 7 months and off work, and 5 months of intense hand therapy is a lot to go through, and a couple of years before you get on top. And I know personal friends that are over 50%, 42% and up, and it's a terrible deal. It's a terrible deal. You don't want to have to walk through that because you were too hard headed. And on the flip side of that too, on that same coin, is when you have this risky task that we talked about in front of you, and you're looking at it and you're like, man, I can just do that. You're basically taking your family and you're putting them in the ante, and you're saying, look, this task right here, more important than my family or any of the stuff that I love. And, if you die at work, what are they going to do?
Replace you.
The company you work for is going to keep on keeping them like they should.
Your
family is going to be left to pick up those pieces of their shattered life. And you deciding to fix this widget maker, and taking these risks, you literally, and you die at work, you're literally affecting generations in your line, right? You die, your kids grow up without a dad or a mom, they get pregnant or get on drugs, which is way higher likely if you're not in the picture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So you just got to be safe and just say no, man. There's almost never a gray area in safety. People make it gray, but you can just say, you know what, man? number one, there's something about that. Hair on the back of my neck stands up. And based on our training and everything I know in the 70, that doesn't feel safe.
Absolutely.
You can't just go, I don't feel safe. Right. I need to go play some Guitar Hero right now in my safe room. But based on your training and you're a smart individual and your policies, procedures, you're like, man, this doesn't seem right, man. Right. Let's take a second look or get a second head involved.
Absolutely.
Right. Do that because you're going to die otherwise. Right. Nobody wants that.
No, and I think and it's true. And thanks again for hopping on and telling your story. I think it's to have somebody who's actually been through it, and it happens to smart people. I've known a couple of arc flash victims as well that are some of the most smart people that I've had the pleasure of knowing, and it can happen to anyone, regardless of your skill set. If you're, if to your point, get complacent or just careless even, right? Because that's part of that complacency equation, but you can get a little bit careless because of the reps and sets. And so I think your story really drives home the impact of what it can have on the outcomes and things. So truly, truly appreciate you hopping on with us. And then if people want to connect with you, obviously we're big on LinkedIn. Where are the best places to connect with you?
That's it, man. I'll forward you an email with stuff and my LinkedIn. I'm the only social media I'm on is LinkedIn, and it's pretty fun. I got a decent following on there, and I post safety stuff, a couple times a week, and it's a great outlet. And I love the banter and the comments. The comment sections blow up. I love it because it's more followers, and honestly, couldn't care any less. This is a platform that just allows me to get more safety stuff out there and have fun. And because I truly am passionate about your safety, your people's safety listening. I don't want to see anybody go through the same thing I did or my friends.
Absolutely.
Right. Or die at work like organizations I'm getting ready to go talk to. Right. It hurts people. It hurts people's families. It's just, if I can do a little part, I'm walking out my mission, vision, passion like I want to, and it's awesome.
Same reason I'm putting out the podcast and stuff. It's about spreading awareness. It benefits the recruiting gig by its own stretch, by association. Right. But by and large, the reason that we put it out there is to educate and inform and try to, make a difference out there to the technicians in the field. So,
also, if you wanted to jump on, so again, I work for Tyndale. And Tyndale, just briefly, we provide 95% of the investor-owned utilities in this country with their PPE.
Very cool.
So we're a distributor of PPE clothing, and Carhartt, Tyndale, Bulwark, all the big brands that you've ever known and loved. We're their largest distributor, and we're a manufacturer. So Tyndale's mission, vision, passion is the same as mine, to keep workers safe. Legitimate. Rob, the owner, that's their mission, right, is to protect workers. My boss, Scott Margolin, if you've ever seen an arc flash video online, he probably had something to do with it. I don't know anybody more passionate than that guy.
That's awesome.
About worker safety. And so that was a good fit, for me. That's why I'm doing what I do.
Yep.
Not many people get to walk out, like I said, their mission, vision, passion in a job that has the same. It's just been a real blessing and an amazing organization. But we do a lot of free stuff for everybody that might be listening, electrical linemen, whoever, and a bunch of free resources. So I do a 70E training on there called the 70E Made Easy. And I break down individual pieces, right? So like on the tables method, I got a 10-minute video that shows you how to walk through the tables or the category, the category tables method. And it's just easy to understand, spoken by me, I got a green screen in the basement and my video guy puts it together. And so we got a bunch of free stuff on there.
That's
so
awesome.
You can jump in on TyndaleUSA.com and get those free resources as well, or connect with me on LinkedIn or whatever,
That's awesome.
So I'm reachable if anybody ever had questions.
You definitely are. And for the audience, Jason was easy. I reached out and said, hey, you want to hop on and do this? He's like, if I can help the collective, let's get her done and spread the awareness and knowledge. And so truly a force for good in the industry. And if you are looking for 70 Echo training or FR or anything like that, of course, Tyndale's in your corner. I'm sure Jason would be willing to help you with that. So
absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, my friend. It was truly an impactful conversation. I can't wait to get it released out to our collective audience here, and hopefully we can save a couple of lives while we're at it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I appreciate getting on these shows with guys like you that are interested in keeping others safe. So
it's a passion for me. I don't know how it ended up the way it is, but I love it. And like I said, I don't mind going to work in the mornings. It's great.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Awesome, my friend. Well, thank you very much once again. Until next time, Mike out.
Thanks for tuning in to the Power Relay with Micah Clay. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to like, subscribe, and leave a review. For more insights, contact info, job offerings, and other content, check out our Linktree sites at Linktree/Micah W. Clay or Linktree/Southern Staffing. We'd love to hear any feedback. And if you know anyone we should highlight, feel free to drop us a message. As always, thanks to those who work tirelessly to keep the lights on. Until next time.